So do you guys know how fake our food system has become? Well, we're about to talk about it. So this is Ben with Tactical Nutrition. And, as I say, we're cutting through the matrix. And one aspect of nutrition that couldn't make this any more clear is how our food is constantly manipulated so that it looks, smells, tastes just like the food it's supposed to be, but oftentimes things through many different processes, and I'll talk about all of them that I can think of off the top of my head here. They resemble the food that they're supposed to be, but they're lacking in the nutrition. Okay? So here we'll start out with the same example I used in my artificial coloring or artificial flavor video, which is a few videos back. I was talking about years ago, I had some yogurt, just some crappy yogurt from whatever, generic supermarket. And this was before I knew a lot more about nutrition. This was before I got a lot more mindful about reading food labels. And, after I was done, it was strawberry flavored yogurt. And after I was done, I looked on the back and it said contains 0% fruit. And that led me down a rabbit hole into Fast Food Nation and other aspects of the food system. Because I was like, well, how come it tastes just like strawberries if there's 0% fruit? It just never made sense intuitively, which it shouldn't to a normal person, right? It's like, why does it taste like what's in here? If it's 0% fruit, the same goes for fruit juices, right? That'll say contains 0% juice. So how do they pull it off? Well, that's through the artificial flavor industry. And I won't go into great detail about it because I talked about it in the other video, but essentially they've identified the molecules in foods, which lead to the taste of that food. So in that case, it'd be strawberries. And then they synthesize artificially that molecule, and then they put it, through whatever process goes on. I don't know the entire process of it. It gets into your food, and so you think you're drinking orange juice, or you think you're eating strawberry yogurt, or you think you're, apple flavored candy cane or lollipop, whatever, all these things. So there's an example of manipulation, blatant manipulation, and, to avoid having to and that's why that stuff is so cheap, because if you were to actually use real strawberries, you'd have to deal with the strawberry instead of just the fake chemical. You'd have to go through all the process of getting the strawberries, keeping them from spoiling, processing down the strawberries, getting them into your product, right? All of this, processed food companies do not want to do any of this stuff. They want to make a lot of money and dupe a lot of people. That's what they do. But there's also examples like, for instance, if you look at ground beef, and this is one reason why I only get organic ground beef, but it could potentially happen the way they package it, right? Is they will spray. I believe they basically put carbon dioxide inside of the packaging, and so it's airtight. And what it does is it keeps the meat looking fresh, even if it's started to spoil. So if you leave your ground beef, let's say raw ground beef, I'm talking about uncooked ground beef, in the fridge, and you let it thaw out for too long, or steak or anything like that, after a while, instead of that nice red meat look, it'll start to turn brown. So what they do is they spray in the carbon dioxide, so it doesn't look like that. So it in reality, it is starting to, I don't want to say spoil, but it's starting the first steps of that, right? And it doesn't look as appealing. That's the real thing. If you saw ground beef in the supermarket and, it was kind of brown instead of red, nobody's going to buy that. It would just be left. It would be left to waste. It's another example. Also, through genetically modifying fruits and vegetables, that's one reason I'm against genetically modifying in general. We shouldn't be messing with these fruits and vegetables, but like they'll keep apples also from spoiling. So you get these apples that have an extra high shelf life, or they'll genetically modify them in certain ways, but it all leads to a lack of nutrition. I don't know as much about the apple. I maybe you could leave it in the comments if you know what I'm talking about, but they make it last longer, but it's artificial. And in the process, you'll notice that a lot of these non-GMO fruits, for example, they just don't have the same taste. So you bite into like a fresh, up here we have the crisp red apples. I get them fresh at the supermarket I go to. And you just bite into it, and it's got that nice, tart, sugary taste, very crunchy, very enjoyable. Whereas if it's kind of like if it's been sprayed and it's grown on infertile soil and things like that, it just doesn't have that taste. And it also doesn't have the nutrition, because just tasting like sugar from an apple is not bad in itself. Natural sugar is not just by itself. It's got nutrients attached to it. This is how we can't compartmentalize our food. Okay? So the biggest thing is the artificial colorings and flavorings. Mainly the flavorings. So I'm trying to think of other examples. Fake meat, there's one. Okay, so they've been talking about this fake meat, and I've been to Chipotle or Qdoba. I do go out to eat occasionally, and I've heard people order the Impossible burrito, and it makes me want to gag. You've got chicken, you've got beef, and you're going to choose a plant-based meat, which doesn't exist, obviously. It's a misnomer. It's not meat if it's plant-based. So we've got plant-based meats, and this stuff is getting pushed on us pretty regularly by the media at this stage. Not just the plant-based meat that didn't really go through too well. I used to see it; it would just be sitting there at the supermarket. Like, nobody really wants it. Very few people are falling for this, because what they do, and this is how they view us in this. Like, one thing I'm trying to understand, and part of me thinks that these like scientists, not all scientists, but these weird like food scientists that are trying to create these synthetic and plant-based foods and stuff, they're kind of idiots. They really are idiots, because they think that if they for instance, if you know that there's iron in meat and there's certain B vitamins in meat and there's like trace minerals and there's all these nutrients and there's a little bit of magnesium and there's like a little bit of this, right? There's all these ingredients in natural meat. And if we were to break down all the nutrition in an actual steak, it would be a very, very long list. Very, very long list. I wouldn't even know where to start besides the obvious, the different types of proteins. But then again, the iron, like I was saying, and then there's even B vitamins in there. And then there's different minerals. It depends on what the feed was. Anyway, etc. But so what they do is they come out with this plant-based meat and then they just fortify it with usually low quality synthetic vitamins and minerals. So they're like fortified with vitamin B6, fortified with iron, you know. See, it's just like the real thing. And it's like no, it's not. It's not like the real thing. You can't synthesize the real thing. And now we've got the lab grown meat. And they just approved our glorious FDA that loves us and cares about our health, obviously. They just approved lab-grown salmon. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen what they mean by lab-grown. And there's probably different ways to do it, but from what I've seen, this is what they do. This is from what I know. On a petri dish, essentially, they grow like they grow clumps of cells. Now, I'll have to go back and like really look into it about exactly how they basically they grow a clump of cells and they kind of nourish those cells by either injecting certain things into them or adding things to the petri dish, and then they artificially grow this essentially tumor. And it comes out and so let's say in terms of like salmon, right? Now, if we were to take, this is where like all of the above that we were talking about earlier in this video comes through. All of the ways that they make this food look fake, culminating in the lab-grown food. So they've got this mass, right? I can only imagine what it would look like. I've never seen one in person. Maybe you could find it online, just what it looks like, their finished product, where it's just a mass of cells, again, sort of like a cancerous tumor. Because I think that's what they do a lot of times, is they activate with certain proteins these cells to divide uncontrollably, which is how they divide and grow the lab-grown meat. Because why would these cells spontaneously divide? So again, it's total frankenfood. And then it's not going to look the same color as salmon, because one of the reasons salmon is the color it is because of the fatty acids that are in it. And I believe there's another natural compound. I should have been more prepared, I guess, for this one, but that gives it the orange color naturally. So what do they do? Again, to make it look like salmon, they inject it with a fake orange color of salmon, or however they do it, bathe it. I don't know. I've never been to one of these labs where they actually grow this meat. But what you get is a lump of cells, a cancerous lump of cells that is then colored the color of salmon, and then the artificial flavor of salmon. And then they cut it in the shape of salmon, mold it to the shape of what a natural salmon looks like, and then they give it to the public. It's just, when you really think about what's going on here, it's just a total lie. And so you're not getting the omega-3 fatty acids. You're not getting the same proteins. You're not getting the iodine that's in there. Now, of course, you're not getting the mercury. I guess that's a plus. But with the artificial meats and fish, it's truly a culmination of all the tactics that they have at their disposal. And again, to recap, to end the video. Well, first I'm going to give some actual useful tools, because I don't want to be like, Ben, why do you always talk about this bad stuff, but don't tell us what to do? You have to learn to navigate food labels. This should be a human skill. Now, the best thing you could do is ideally if you grow your own food or you catch your own fish and you know the source of the fish, you know it's a real fish. right? Or you grow your own meat, or you go to the butcher and you know where the meat came from. Yes, obviously, that would be the best solution. But not all of us have that, I guess, ability or opportunity. I certainly don't at the moment. But you have to be able to navigate the food. So what they'll do next, this will be the next step, is when they begin to market the food, depending on how the FDA, etc., has them label on the packaging or at the restaurant. I doubt, hopefully, that they can just come out at your favorite restaurant and say, here's your salmon fillet, without somehow labeling it as lab-grown salmon. I would hope that there's regulations, and that would be diabolical. But what I do is that we'll start there. Food labels after this. But when I go to the restaurant, and this is with fish or shrimp, especially, I'll ask, is it wild caught? Now, many times the waiter or waitress doesn't know what I'm talking about, so they just say yes, and I might be SOL, But a lot of times they do know. The more knowledgeable waiters or waitresses will say, they can tell you maybe where it was even, caught or shipped from, at least. But sometimes you got to understand, most people don't even know about any of this stuff. So when you ask, you could definitely go up to like a manager if you really cared. And at this point, it might not be a bad idea if you're going to order salmon or shrimp, because not only, now there's not going to be lab-grown salmon at a restaurant for some time, but I'm more talking about at this point farmed versus wild-caught, because there's another difference there. Farmed salmon versus wild-caught salmon, and you can usually tell because it will say sustainably caught. Anytime you see sustainably when it comes to food, it's not organic. It's a buzzword that they use to try to entice the public into eating their crap, because it sounds very nice. It's like, oh, you don't want to be sustainable? You want to be sustainable, don't you? That's what that means. But, so asking at restaurants, asking questions, hey, this steak, is it organic? Is it grass-fed? And I don't consider that being too much of a pain in the butt. You know what I mean? Like, you could take it over the top and maybe they get annoyed. But you know what? It's like, it's your food. It's your body. You're paying your money. You deserve to know. And if they say, no, this is industrial farmed cow or something like that, then maybe you still order it anyway. That's what's out there. Most of it is anyway, but it's up to you. You might be able, then you can make your own decision. You can say no. Okay, well, you don't have to say no. You just say, oh, I'll have this instead, right? If you have like bison, that's one reason why like bison and buffalo and stuff like that, a lot of the more exotic, I guess you could say, meats at restaurants are a lot more expensive because they're not industrial farmed. They're higher quality meat, higher priced meat. Now, reading food labels is a skill, and you can just start by looking at packaging closely to see what how the wordage is. So, for instance, going back to fish, I like those ready smoked fish that are already cooked and they're just in the package and you just open it up and eat it. Now, I've looked at some and they'll say wild caught, North Alaskan salmon, right? And usually it's a little bit more expensive, but that's what I'm looking for. Now, I've also seen, but at the same time, there's a company, I can't remember it because I don't buy it, but the name of the company was like wild something, wild fish or wild caught or something. It was the name of the company. So they kind of pulled one on you. But then on the back, it said, we use sustainably, fished salmon. So I'm like, and they charge as much as the wild caught salmon. So it's clever, right? They can put whatever they want in the name. There's nothing that says you can't have wild in your name. They are on top. There's focus groups going on here. They know what the consumers will buy and won't buy. And the people like me that are just really looking at, I'm not going to be their little lackey. So reading the food labels, looking on the back, I mean, obviously you should already be able to read food labels to look at your macros. This is just to know how much sugar has been added to the food, how much protein is in it, etc. And then you can read your ingredients list. Now there's a lot of things. The ingredients list can be hard to decipher because there's a lot of things that have weird names that sound like chemicals, but they're not. So it's like tocopherol. It's not. I can't even remember what vitamin it is, but it's not a chemical, But, and then there's xylitol, sugar alcohols. But a lot of times in the ingredients list, like what I like to see is if it's like some kind of meat product or I don't know. I'm trying to think of something specific, but it'll just say like 3 things. It'll be like beef, this and this. And so you're like, okay. And sometimes they even go the extra yard and go, because if they grow organic, they want to go out of their way to boast about that, as they should, because their practice is more expensive and they're not lying, so they can say it without being held for lying about their product. Whereas if you're a non-organic food and you say you're organic, now you're, I don't know whatever law that is, but they're breaking a law of some sort of regulation. You can't say that you're organic. There's certain standards, not going to go into it here. I don't even know all of them. It has to do with the pesticides. And just because you get something that's organic also doesn't necessarily mean it's totally good either. But it's a start. It's better than nothing. And the reason that I say that is because there's a lot of pesticides and whatnot that they use on vegetables and fruits. There's like 80 pesticides and they only test for like 5. So if you just don't use the ones they test for, you can say that, that you can use that as part of your organic claim. But you can also look on, like, you should best to just avoid the boxed processed foods that have anything to do with fruit, or especially fruit. Generally not vegetables, but what you'll find is like, here's a good example. If you look at something and it has MSG, monosodium glutamate in it. Now, that's a type of, like, basically it's like an artificial flavoring, but it's also what's called a palatant, makes you want to eat the food. But so they'll like, sometimes it'll go under the guise of spices. So like if you get like, I don't know, I think like ramen noodles or something like that, really cheap, like kind of like weird fake soups and stuff like that, they put in MSG to make it taste like the real thing. And they call it a spice. And you can only do as well as, you can. Bruise there. But, so learning to read the food labels, especially like the front of the box, and looking for the artificial colorings, looking for the artificial flavors. Because a lot of times what they'll also do is say real. They'll use the word real, like with real ingredients. It's like, so they're not imaginary? Yeah, no shit. But anyway, I'm kind of rambling now. But the main thing I wanted to get across is just, it's best to stay as natural as you can and try and get organic and try to like avoid the processed foods, because again, what you're getting is a lot of times it tastes like the real thing. But not only are you not getting the nutrients, but you're more often than not getting a lot of toxins, chemicals, other junk your body doesn't need, and that's going to make you sick. So anyway, that's all I got. That's my rant for the day, guys. I will see you guys in the next video.